watching The End Zone, sponsored by Lucky Star Casino.
And welcome to a bowl edition of The End Zone, along with TJ Eckert. I am Colby Daniels. The Armed Forces Bowl in Fort Worth, OU Navy, a thriller as we wrap up the 2024 OU football season. TJ, what a day it was in Fort Worth.
A thriller, but in all the wrong ways, I guess, right? This team does find ways to both win and lose in dramatic fashion, and we unfortunately got the latter of those two. Love the idea of going for two at the end of the game. Why not? It's a bowl game, but ultimately they don't get it, and now we're talking about a losing season again.
I heard somebody say, well, at least we got a good game. I don't know that it was a good game. It was a close game, right? We had a tight finish, but I don't know that it was a good game. I thought there were things on both sides that could have been cleaned up, and we'll obviously start with the offense because, TJ, it was a fast start for the OU offense. That first drive, I thought the play calling was brilliant. There was an emphasis to run the football on that opening drive, and that was clearly their best drive of the game. And even on the second drive, they were bailed out by a Michael Hawkins scramble. They were bailed out by Michael Hawkins being a freak athlete and extending the play and throwing the touchdown pass. But they went really pass heavy early, and I thought that in some ways sort of derailed the offensive momentum they had in the opening drive at least.
And then when you need to lean on the run game, there's a couple 4th and 1s that you don't pick up. After you've been so good with the run game early, you almost lose that momentum, that confidence with it, and then when you really need it, you're not able to pick them up. And so that was part of the problem for me. You mentioned some sloppiness. There were some missed field goals too. How many drops did you say it was? Seven?
7 drops is what Brent Venables told us in the postgame. It's 7 clean drops.
And a lot of that's freshmen, guys who haven't played, but when you got a freshman QB and you got some inconsistencies on offense, you have to make just about every play you have, and they didn't do that.
I thought that Michael Hawkins said something interesting after the game about the offense. He said after the first couple drives going into the second quarter, he said, we just relaxed. And he's admitting that. And
then it's like, okay, now what? Right? That can happen sometimes. And maybe that's what ended up happening today. I don't know. But it did feel like things got a little more passive. Relax is a good word. There was not such a sense of urgency from this offense to continue and keep their foot on the gas and we really didn't see them do that all year long. And to expect them to do it here, I guess, is maybe a little far-fetched. But the way they started felt like they could have easily done that.
What were your thoughts on the 4th down attempts early in the game? They had one where they were close to scoring that failed. They also had the one on their own end that led to Navy's first touchdown of the game.
I don't have a problem with it. I think if it was September in a non-conference game, I said this a lot to a lot of people, you probably end up punting or kicking a field goal, whatever. In a bowl game like this, why not? And we mentioned asserting your will early in the game. Why not try and continue that if you're Brent Venables in that offense? And the one in there deep in scoring territory, I'm fine with. The one where they're backed up a little bit more, I think it's around midfield, maybe the 40. You could question a little bit more, but again, if you can't get a yard against Navy, then what are you doing here?
You might argue, though, if you kick the field goal and you go up 3 possessions, that obviously is going to change the way that Navy potentially plays. It becomes about managing the clock, and they can't run every play down to 10 seconds when they're down by 3 possessions. Just a little, I think, aftermath of everything that took place. Now, at the end of the game, obviously, they got the big touchdown to Jake Roberts. The offense was humming. They were at a fast pace, and we all thought this might turn into a Sooner win. Where were you at on the 2-point conversion attempt? Were you go for it
4
or extend the game?
Good with it. One, I wanted to get out of here. So, go for 2. I did not like the play call. I would have rather seen Hawkins get out of the pocket and have an option to use his legs if he needed to. But I have no problem going for 2. I know people at home are saying, well, just kick it. But that's hindsight, right? Again, get 3 yards, you win the game. Get 1 yard on 4th and 1, you extend the drive and maybe go up 21-0. So hindsight's always great, but I don't mind those play calls, especially, again, in a bowl game such as this.
There were multiple conversations among the media, I think, after this game happened, and some people said, you have the better football team, the more talented football team, extend the game and let your better players play. I might argue that you had the better team for the first quarter, but Navy, I think, was probably the better team for the remaining 3 quarters of the game. If we're having that conversation, then you might not want to give Navy extra opportunities.
And you got to stop them inside the 20 in overtime. I don't know how you'd like your chances there.
Yeah, it was interesting. If you told me today, before this game kicked off, Michael Hawkins is going to throw the ball over 40 times, Is that a Sooner win or a Sooner loss?
Probably a loss.
I'm saying that's a Sooner loss.
So
that, to me, didn't seem like the recipe for this team to ultimately win.
Agreed.
Along with TJ Eckert, I am Colby Daniels. We'll talk about the defense and stopping. Along with TJ Eckert, I am Colby Daniels as we are in Fort Worth wrapping up the Armed Forces Bowl. Navy over Oklahoma, 21-20 in a thriller. Let's talk about what has been the strength of this OU team all year long, and that's the defense. Now, this was a game where Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman did not participate. They are getting ready for the NFL draft and their big money futures, if you will. The Sooners are not shy on talent on that side of the ball, even without Stutzman and Billy Bowman, but overall, defensively in this game, we knew that stopping Navy on early downs was going to be very important to the overall success of this football game. And I think just in general, the question about how they would look at
first down. It was a lot of 2nd and 10, loss of yardage, 2nd and 12, whatever, or at very least.
And then they ultimately are able to put a touchdown in the end zone before the first half, which made this game feel, I think, a lot closer than it looked going into halftime with the trick plays, right? I mean, for as locked in as Oklahoma seemed to be throughout the first half, the more trick plays that they
passing game, and it was 7 or 8 yards, like a third and
long.
The
last drive, their touchdown drive.
Yeah. That was the only time we really saw that, and it wasn't a threat throughout the game, but then they ended up capitalizing on it there late. So how much of a difference would Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman have made? Probably a little bit, but Navy had a good game plan, and they made good adjustments, I thought, there in the second half.
I thought Kip Lewis seemed like he was all over the field, which we knew he was going to play a big role today without Danny Stutzman. Kobe McKenzie was great. You know, I think the entire defense is probably to blame for the 95-yard touchdown run. I don't know. I mean, Danny Stutzman probably does make that tackle, but as we're watching that play unfold, I mean, the entire OU defense was fooled. And Horvath had a hole in the middle of the field that you and I could have at least made it to the 50 on.
I don't know about that. I would have probably slid for like an 8-yard gain and just called it good. But,
give yourself a little more credit.
Right. I think that was a misfit, I think is what Venables said in the postgame afterwards. And so a misfit is typically coming from the linebacker position, which would be one of Danny Stutzman. So Owen Heineke played quite a bit today. It's a walk-on from Bishop Kelly. So there was quite a few young guys that were playing today on that defense and offense. So there's a question of, would that have happened if, and unfortunately we don't have that. The what-if game is hard to play in a situation such as this.
Overall, I got the vibe, though, that Brent Venables was pretty happy with the defensive performance.
I think so, and that's probably why people were so concerned or questioning the 2-point plays. Like, if you really feel good about where your defense is at, why not put them back on the field in overtime and give them a chance? It's the strength of your team. But, yeah, in the postgame, he was more upset with missed opportunities by the offense, and then he did hit on the big play a handful of times there as well.
I mean, as I'm watching this game and I'm trying to keep an eye on the play clock every time Navy had the football, and I couldn't do it every time, but I would say I watched the play clock about 80% of Navy snaps. I never saw them snap the ball with above 10 seconds on the clock. That's got to be frustrating for the defense as well, right? I mean, that getting into your stance and then waiting, and then finally the play happens, and it almost like neutralizes some of the natural defensive aggressiveness.
Momentum, any of that, it neutralizes a lot.
Yeah. But it was a fun matchup, and obviously, again, it's a victory for Navy. That final drive, which took over 7 minutes to put the game-winning touchdown on the board, certainly was the script for what Navy wanted to do in this football game. All right, we're going to take a timeout, and we're going to spin it forward and talk about what's to come in 2025 for the Sooners next on the End Zone. It is a 6-7 season for the 2024 Oklahoma Sooners, their second losing season in 3 years, and their second losing season since Bob Stoops' first year in Norman, right, which was an eternity ago, it feels like. 1998, if my math is correct.
98.
I don't know, it's been a while, so the math in my head doesn't always add up. You got to bounce back, right? Next year, obviously, has to be a big turnaround. I don't think, going 7-6 is going to do the trick. But what is next for the 2025 Sooners, TJ? Because this is a schedule that is still very difficult, right? It's still the same SEC schedule that you played this year, only flipped. You go to Alabama. You have Missouri at home. You have Ole Miss at home. Yeah, it's flipped. But it's still a very tough schedule.
And you had Michigan. So
that's right.
So not much.
You don't have free non-con victories.
So what's next is you got Ben Arbuckle here. He coached in the game tonight, obviously. You get a full off season with him implementing his offense, doing what he wants to do. You get John Mateer in. He doesn't have to learn anything. It's just the offense he just ran at Washington State with a bunch of success. And you hope that works. And if it doesn't work, the seat is hotter than ever, I think, for Brent Venables, right? So keep an eye on what happens early in the fall of 2025. We can maybe talk about the portal and all that here in a sec. But if you lose to Michigan or you lose one of those first SEC games, you're 2-2, 1-3. There's a chance he gets fired early in the year. So it's just hard to believe that we're talking about that. But the seat's hot, maybe the hottest in the entire SEC at this point.
I think defensively they're still going to be in really good shape.
I mean,
they still have a lot of really talented defenders, and I would assume that they're only going to add more. And I'm sure the freshman class will produce some help. But offensively, it has to be a drastic change. And I do think Ben Arbuckle is going to make a massive difference.
I think so.
If nothing else, I think the sequencing of play calling drastically improves with Ben Arbuckle on the headset.
Yeah.
And then I think the quarterback position also improves just in terms of being able to manage a game, if nothing else, right? And we know that John Mateer is certainly a great playmaker, but just being able to manage a game, those are two things that really improve. But I think the biggest question for me is the question that we asked going into this season. The offensive line has to be the biggest question mark of the team, doesn't it?
It has to, and we'll have to keep an eye on who leaves in the portal, who stays in the portal, who they get out of the portal. I think it was the last 5 games of the season, that they started the same starting 5 offensive line group.
Right.
And they had made a change, I think, every game before that. So keep an eye on who comes back from that group, who doesn't. But that'll be a question, because it doesn't matter how good your quarterback is if you can't block anybody, or how good the play calling is.
Maybe at 4 sacks today, right?
So that makes it challenging. On the defensive side, Kip Lewis already announced that he's coming back, or the Oklahoma Collective announced he's coming back. They did the same for R. Mason Thomas. They deleted the tweet, but he played in the bowl game. So keep an eye on what R. Mason Thomas does, because that guy's a stud, and I think his stock's pretty high right now. But why would you play in the game if you're leaving? Stutz and Bowman, those guys are leaving. So keep an eye on those guys if they end up staying for sure, or if they leave, because you mentioned the defense should be in a good spot, but you lose someone like that, there's a big question mark.
I would say offensively, don't forget Deion Burks is coming back despite having missed the majority of this season. That is a major weapon that they didn't have this year. Jaden Gibson has a massive ceiling in terms of the playmaker he can be. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what happens with the crop of transfer portal receivers they brought in. Also defensively, R. Mason Thomas would be a preseason All-American. And I think David Stone and Jaden Jackson on the interior will be significant to OU's success in 2025.
Yeah, and the linebacker room, you lose Stutzman, obviously, so maybe Kobe McKenzie's the one who steps into that leadership role. Guy's a freak, one of the top recruited guys in the country coming out. Yeah. So
Robert Spears-Jennings, Eli Bowen, also big
Gentry Williams didn't play all year long. Can he be healthy? That's another big impact guy.
Major improvement at the quarterback position. All right, we will wrap up the Sooners' 2024 season next on the Inside. All right, for the final time from Fort Worth, it's a 21-20 win for Navy in the Armed Forces Bowl, and that wraps up the 2024 season for the Oklahoma Sooners, a 6-7 season that, I think we were all anticipating what a season inside the SEC conference would look like.
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't go the way that anybody anticipated. Injuries were a big part of that, and anybody that's going to say the Sooners' season was a disaster has to tell the whole story, and injuries were a big part of it, but this was a season that had a wild roller coaster ride, and I know you go back to the opener, right? They had the big win, but there were offensive concerns after game number 1 to start this year. Yeah, there were, and hindsight, the Tennessee game, they lose, but Michael Hawkins comes in, there's a little of a spark there, and you're like, okay, something might be happening here. Then they go beat Auburn, it's like, okay, here we go, this is a lot of fun. And then it went downhill from there, obviously, but in terms of favorite moments, if there was a moment you could pick out, do you just go straight to the Alabama game? Is that the moment? I mean, I think beating Alabama on your home field when you needed a win to become bowl eligible, and it was just Alabama and at LSU left on your schedule, that seemed pretty daunting. Right. And I think just that scene after the game and rushing the field, I mean, that was obviously the moment. I would say Kip Lewis pick 6. Of that game? In the Auburn game. Oh, the Auburn game, yeah. Well, in that game, too, but there's the theme. Kip Lewis pick 6. There's your 2 moments. But to to save the Auburn game. I mean, that was in one singular moment. That might be the biggest of the year.
I was in Columbia for the Mizzou game when Billy Bowman runs back the fumble for a touchdown, and at that point, OU had no chance of winning. They were awful that game. He runs that back late in the fourth, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to win. And so for like 40 seconds, it was like, that's the play of the year. The season's turned around and went downhill again from there. But there were some good moments, but some bad. There needs to be more good next year, or we'll be having a very dismal conversation next fall.
The other cool thing I will just note, I mean, this SEC schedule, seeing brands like Tennessee and Alabama in Norman was really cool. Seeing OU at Auburn, in the Grove and Ole Miss, I mean, at LSU in a night game, right? I mean, those are some of the coolest things in all of college football, and Oklahoma fans got to see their team play in those environments. That's pretty cool.
And looking ahead to 25, now you go to Bryant-Denny Stadium, right, in Alabama. You go to Knoxville, which was crazy when Baker went there however many years ago that was now. So this is what you signed up for when you joined the SEC, and Sooner fans got not a lot of good, but some, and some cool moments, and you're going to get even more of it next year. So it's sad that it's over, no matter how bad it may have been. Sad it was over because it was a good time covering the sport. Looking forward to next year, and we'll see what happens with the Sooners.
I will say, I think we said 7-5, 8-4 was probably the realistic. I at least was told I was a little bit crazy, but I wasn't crazy enough, clearly, because 6-7 is the final result. For TJ Eckert, I am Colby Daniels. Everybody have a great weekend. This has been The End Zone.